once again, we'd like to turn to Psalm 23. Again, everything, we keep reiterating this, but everything in the Psalm, everything in the life of Psalm 23 flows back to the Lord is my shepherd. In every verse, there is something about us. You see me, my, I, all through the psalm. But the psalm really isn't about us. He's the subject. And everything about us in this psalm relates to the shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. So as you read through the psalm, you see there is He and there is me, but He's the doer. Again, verse 2, He maketh me. So it's He and me, but He's the doer. He maketh me. He leadeth me. Again, He, me, but He's the doer. We are the recipient of His doing. He restoreth my soul. We have He, we have my, or me again. He leadeth me. Again, He, me, but He's the restorer, He's the leader. Does all for His name's sake. You see in verse 4 that even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, Thou, that's Him, art, that's the verb, with me. Thy rod, Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me. Again, you get the idea. Everything, it's He, me. He's the doer of all the acts. We are the recipients, the blessed recipients of those acts. So because the Lord is my shepherd, glorious possibilities exist for every child of God. There is a wonderful life to be lived for every child of God. As we've said many times, if life is not wonderful for you, if you're saved, then you're doing it wrong. It's just as simple as that. Then you're not living right. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, or I shall not lack. We've looked the last couple weeks at verse 2, He maketh me lie down in green pastures. Doesn't allow us to stay there. From there, He leadeth me beside the still waters. Waters, of course, is plural. So there's more than just a pond somewhere or a stream. These waters are everywhere. And He leadeth me beside the still waters. And the sheep's health, the sheep's nourishment, and their need of refreshment requires these waters. They have to have them. The shepherd, of course, knows that. He knows what we need. He knows what is required. And He leadeth me beside the still waters. The waters are described as still. That is, they flow slowly and calmly. The Hebrew word means restful waters. He leadeth me beside the restful waters. Again, sheep are very anxious. Rushing water scares them. They're not going to drink from rushing water. So these still waters are calm, they're quiet, they are undisturbed, the very opposite of that which is turbulent. And so here we are in a world of mass confusion, a world of bewilderment, and in the midst of that which is chaotic, there's chaos everywhere, and everybody's so hurried and frantic, there are still waters. And the shepherd knows where these waters are. He not only knows where they are, he produces them. They flow from him, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So these still waters, just like the green pastures, are a picture of tranquility. The implication of the still waters is that they're deep. They're deep. And they're clean. And they're pure. They're very refreshing for the sheep. In other words, there's an abundance of good in them. And he leadeth me beside the still waters. They're appropriate for the sheep. They're very beneficial to the well-being of the sheep. The world is filled with muddy waters. The world is filled with poisonous waters. The world is filled with threatening and raging waters. But there are also the still waters. Sheep left to themselves will, for the most part, just the dew on the ground in the morning gives them water. But left to themselves in the day, they're going to drink out of polluted waters and become diseased. So it is with God's people. Left to ourselves, we will drink out of polluted waters. Sheep left to themselves will destroy themselves. They will ruin their lives. And so it is with God's people. So these waters speak of God's provision for His own. And God's provision is always loving. God's provision is always beneficial to us. God does not give us that which is going to harm us spiritually. God's provision is timely, always right on time. God's provision is abundant. It's more than we need. We never fully partake of God's provision. They're too abundant, they're too deep. And God's provision can even be miraculous. And so it is with these still waters. So the still water speaks of God's provision of tranquility. Notice, He leadeth me beside, next to, the still waters. Next to the still waters. So again, it's a position of calm. It's a position of serenity and presence of mind. The sheep are very comfortable. The sheep are very relaxed as He leads them beside the still waters. Again, the very opposite of troubled waters. Notice in Psalm 46, verse 3, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, And there are many of those. But He leads us beside the still waters, the waters that are troubled are, of course, very unsettling and can be very unsettling to the sheep. But He leads us beside the still waters. So bewilderment and confusion can be on every side. Those things can surround us. But the shepherd can still the roaring waters. He can still the troubled waters, as He did in Mark 4:39. All He had to do was speak. He didn't have to do that. That's what He did. Peace, be still. And there was a great calm. There was a great calm. So even if the waters are troubled, the Lord can make them still. He can make them still. So again, they move slowly, calmly, and they bring peace to the soul. He leadeth me beside the still waters. The whole world can be falling apart, but God's people can have peace in their soul. And that's all because of the Good Shepherd and what He does. We don't create this peace. We don't create the still waters, but He leads us beside them. It speaks of God's provision of enjoyment and pleasantness. It's an enjoyment of the person of Christ. He causes us to enjoy Himself and to experience the influence of His grace, His mercy, His long-suffering, His goodness. It's the experience of all these things. That's the still waters. The sheep walking alongside the still waters with the shepherd. He's leading. He's out front. So you have the presence of the shepherd. He's guiding the sheep. And the sheep are just enjoying life. It's a time of great enjoyment. It's a time of spiritual gratification. And that can always be so for the child of God. We can always enjoy spiritual things, no matter what is happening. And we ought to always be gratified spiritually, regardless of what is happening. So, these still waters is something that, in this enjoyment of these still waters, is something that goes beyond circumstances to our liking. Again, people who, and many of God's people, or at least they profess to be, if circumstances have to be to your liking to be happy, something is terribly wrong with you spiritually. If circumstances have to be to our liking in order for us to be happy, there is a spiritual problem. And that spiritual problem needs to be rectified. We see these still waters go beyond personal preferences being met. If all your personal preferences have to be met in order for you to be happy, that's indicative of, a great spiritual problem. This goes beyond the fulfillment of self. Spiritual fulfillment far greater than fleshly fulfillment. This is something that goes beyond the comfort and joy of self. Something that goes beyond personal attainments. The still waters. Again, the world is filled with problems. Life is filled with problems. Life is filled with complications. Things get complicated. Things are complicated because of sin. Before sin entered, things were pretty simple. And you live victorious over sin, Life's pretty simple. Sin complicates everything. Self complicates everything. Life is filled with difficulties. Life is filled with sorrows. Life is filled with burdens and affliction and suffering. Yet, the child of God can walk through life, through it all, following the shepherd beside the still waters. And in so doing, they have wonderful experiences. And in so doing, they experience Psalm 36, verse 8. Notice if we turn there. Psalm 36, verse 8. They shall be abundantly satisfied. And that's what happens when the shepherd leads us beside the still waters. We become abundantly satisfied. Psalm 46, verse 4. There is a river. There always is. The streams whereof shall make glad the city of God. God has His waters. Always does. And He leads His sheep beside the still waters. So in this life, where most live lives of gloom, most live lives of great failure and frustration, exasperation, confusion, the child of God can live above it all because he has a shepherd. And that shepherd leads us beside the still waters. And beside the still waters, there's that which is satisfying to spirituality. There's that which is pleasing to spirituality, that which is delightful. And that can be our life. That should be our life. And again, if it's not, it's because we're doing it all wrong. The source of these waters is God. God is always the source of the still waters. The sheep are never the source of the still waters. The world is not the source. Circumstances are not the source. The source of the waters is God. They flow from God. These are things that flow from, it's a tranquility, a calmness that flows from God. Notice in Jeremiah chapter 2. Jeremiah chapter 2. In verse 13. Jeremiah 2, verse 13. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, and here's what I want to notice, the fountain of living waters. He's the fountain. He's the source. God is the source of these waters. Jeremiah 17 and verse 13. Last part of the verse. They have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. He's the fountain of that which is satisfying. He's the fountain of that which brings peace and tranquility. Those things come from God. People get upset. God's people get upset. And many times, if not most of the time, they run from God. Well, I'm upset. I won't be in church now. I'm upset. Well, that's where you ought to be. You're forsaking the fountain, forsaking the source of that which can help you. And many never seem to learn that simple lesson. God is the source. God is the source. Circumstances are not the source of peace. They're not the source of tranquility. God is the source. Ezekiel 47, verse 1. We see that behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house. And then you can read on there and see these waters. We see the same thing in Revelation 22 and verse 1. God is the source of these waters. Now, if you drop down to verse 9 of Ezekiel 47, God is the source, and the waters proceed into the desert of this world. And it shall come to, verse 9, and it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth whithersoever the rivers shall come, shall live. And there shall be a very great multitude of fish because of these waters shall come thither. For they shall be healed, and everything shall live whither the river cometh. So the river flows from God. The waters flow from God, and they flow into the desert of this water. The Lord is the source, and He leads us beside the still waters. They're inexhaustible. These waters are inexhaustible. Notice in Revelation chapter 7 and verse 17. Revelation 7. Verse 17. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, He shall lead them unto living fountains of waters. He shall lead them unto living fountains. That is, they're abundant. They're always flowing. And they're unaffected. These waters are unaffected by time. People always moaning and groaning about the evil of the times, and there's no question. Times are evil. Times are difficult. That's not debatable. But really, what does that have to do with you and I? What does it have to do with the life that we are called to live? Really nothing. Because what flows from God is unaffected by time and season. The still waters are unaffected by time and season. Notice in Zechariah chapter 14. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 8. And it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem. Again, in that day. In that day. They're unaffected by times and seasons. So we need to look at what the Lord does. We have these still waters. Now, what does the Lord do for His sheep in relation to these waters? Does He leave it to you and I to just find them on our own? No, because we'll misidentify them. He doesn't leave it to ourselves. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Well, I just can't find them. Again, there's a spiritual problem. You're not following the Lord. Because if you follow the Lord, He leads beside the still waters. If you're never finding the still waters, you're not following the Lord. It's really that simple. People want to blame it on everything else, but everything comes down to a spiritual problem. To be led by Him is to have a connection to Him in our life. It is living life connected to Him. He leadeth me. That means my life is in step with God. And when life is in step with God, we will find ourselves beside the still waters. In time of need, we will find ourselves beside the still waters. So God the shepherd knows where these waters are. And He can create them. He can take a muddy river and make it pure. He knows where they are, and He leadeth. It's not He led me, it is He leadeth. He does it over and over and over and over again. And if we're following Him, we will find ourselves beside the still waters. Child of God says, I just can't find peace. I can't find it anywhere. You're not following. I know that offends people, but that's the truth. Because He leads beside the still waters. The Lord is shepherd, guides to these still waters. He conducts us to these still waters. He accompanies us. He doesn't leave us there, but He leadeth beside, leads us along beside the still waters. Notice in Psalm 48, Psalm 48, verse 14. For this God is our God, forever and ever. He will be our guide, even unto death. So if God is our God, we have a relationship with God. Does it not stand to reason that He will be our guide? He will guide us. He will lead us, even unto death. And through the death process, He leads. Notice in Psalm 73, verse 24, Thou shalt guide me with Thy counsel. Well, God guides in a lot of different ways. But He leads, He guides. One of the ways is just giving us counsel. Well, I can't find the still waters anywhere. Well, are you listening? Are you listening to His counsel? He guides us by His counsel. And He leads beside the still waters. Isaiah chapter 30. Isaiah chapter 30. Verse 21. Isaiah 30, verse 21. And thine ears shall hear a word behind thee saying, This is the way. Walk ye in it. This is the way. What man likes to do is you hear that word, this is the way. Okay, now we got to study it. We got to study this way. We got to see if we like this way. We got to see if this way is going to lead us to where we want to be. You got to make sure that this way has the perfect weather and the perfect circumstances and the perfect job, and on and on and on it goes. Well, pretty soon what you've done is you've disregarded what God says, this is the way. Walk ye in it. This is the way. Don't just stand there and observe it. Don't think about it. You don't even need to pray about it. When the Lord says, this is the way, walk. That's what you're to do. It's very simple. When you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left. So God leads. He leads in a way. He leads down a path. And I believe the path and the waters, the still waters, go together. I believe if you follow God's path, that path will lead you to still waters. You get off that path, you might find turbulent waters. You may, on God's path, find turbulent waters, but there will also be still waters. So, the path and the waters go together. We see in the next verse of Psalm 23 that he leads in paths of righteousness. And those paths include still waters. But the point is, he leadeth me beside the still waters. So the still waters are not experienced apart from his leading or apart from us following his leading. So again, if we're not experiencing the still waters, there's a problem with our following. The problem's not his leading. The problem is us. So wherever he leads, I believe there will be these waters. Now, I'm not saying that wherever God leads, there's not going to be any problems. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that in the midst of problems, in the midst of turbulent waters, in the midst of storms, there will be still water. And God leads beside these. Notice in Isaiah 49. Isaiah 49 and verse 10. They shall not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them. For he that hath mercy on them shall lead them. So we see his leading is connected with his mercy. Even by, this is where he'll lead them, even by the springs of water shall he guide them. Again, there may be storm all around, but God leadeth us beside the still waters. Sheep need water. Left to themselves, again, they're very likely to drink water that is going to expose them to disease. And God's people drink from the water fountains of this world, and God's people are plagued with spiritual disease. They like to identify it as something else, but spiritual disease is rampant amongst God's people. Sheep need the refreshment of pure water. They need guidance to this pure water. And God the shepherd is the one who guides. He escorts us, if you will, to the still water, beside the still water. So God's leading and God's provision go together. When will God's people learn that lesson? God's leading and God's provision go together. And don't get the order backwards, because that's what God's people do all the time. God's provision equals God's leading. No. Or provision equals God's leading. God's leading and God's provision go together. We need still water. And he leadeth me beside the still water. It's an act of his love. It's an act of his kindness. It's an act of his patience. And again, he leads wisely. He leads in a timely manner. Notice in Psalm 80, in verse 1. Psalm 80, in verse 1. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a flock, thou that dwellest between the cherubims. That's God's grace and mercy. God leads his people. God leads his people. We need to seek his leadership in everything that we do. Everything. We need to seek his leading. God not only leads, he provides these still waters, he creates them, He can do so in a miraculous way. He can do so when these waters are not in sight anywhere. And God can make them appear. Notice in Psalm 78, verse 20. Behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. God did that. Where there are no waters, God can create them. And He often does. Psalm 105. Psalm 105. Verse 41. He opened the rock and the waters gushed out. They ran in the dry places like a river. It can be dryness all around you. And God can lead you to the still water right where you are. Because He can create it right where you are. Psalm 114, verse 8. Which turned the rock into a standing water, the flint into a fountain of waters. Notice Isaiah 48. Isaiah 48 and verse 21. And they thirsted not when He led them through the deserts. You spend the time they spent in the desert, you're going to get thirsty, but they thirsted not. He caused the waters to flow out of the rock for them. And God can create still waters for you. He clave the rock, and the waters gushed out. Before He did that, there were none. There were no waters. Notice in Isaiah 35, verses that we've preached from. Love these verses. Isaiah 35, verses 6 and 7. Then shall the lame man leap, as a heart, and the tongue of the dumb sing. And this is what we want to notice. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. God can do that. God can put water where there is none. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. In the habitation of dragons, where each lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes. So again, there's absolutely no reason for the child of God to think that they have to drink from the muddy waters of this world. Well, I don't see pure water anywhere. You just wait. You wait and you follow the Lord. It'll be there. And it'll be there when you need it. God knows exactly when you need it. He knows where you need it. And He leads beside the still water. So, the shepherd, the way he creates these still waters sometimes when there is none, sheep, of course, are scared of water. And that's I'm sure, a God-given instinct, because if sheep get in water, they're like sponges. And they're going to get weighted down, and they're going to drown. So God gives them an instinct to be afraid of water. So they're obviously going to be afraid of rushing water. So what the shepherd will do is he'll dam up a river, backing it up and causing the water over here to be still, so he can lead his sheep, the still water. So again, just because it may be rushing water all around you, what the shepherd can do. What the shepherd can do to still the waters. And then he leads you beside the still waters. The still waters really speak of joy and the stresses of life. Oh, I've got so much stress. Well, who doesn't? And let's be honest. We create a lot of it ourselves. We create a lot of our own stress. But stress is stress, whether it's self-created or whatever. Yes, life is filled with stress. But for the child of God, there can be joy in distress. Joy in distress. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Oh, how blessed we are to have the Lord as our shepherd. May we live that life. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in